for your patience, and I know it's a difficult time because it's after lunch, but if you could all sit down, and if you feel the need to have a conversation with the person next to you, can you please take it outside instead of disturbing other people around you? If your phone rings, put it on silent immediately. In fact, I'm giving you 10 seconds now to check whether your phone is on silent actually, and to put it on silent. And if you must drink water from those bottles, finish the bottle. Don't drink half of it and abandon it. That's bad ecological practice.
Check, check. Good afternoon and welcome to the post-lunch session. I'm sure all of you enjoyed the food. I can still feel the spellbinding effect of the last session on each one of us present here. So let's start with the Kabir Doha. Pothi padi padi jag moya, pandit bhai na koi, dhai akshar prem ke, padhe so pandit hoi. So may the love for the divine make us better beings, and on the stage we have some very special scholars. We'll be having a panel discussion on the word made flesh, the vexed business of translation. On stage we have Anand Thakore. Anand Thakore's poetry collection includes Waking in December, Elephant Bathing, Mughal Sequence, Selected Poems, and 7 Deaths and 4 Scrolls, shortlisted for the Jayadeva National Poetry Award. A Hindustani classical vocalist, he has devoted much of his life to the study, performance, composition, and teaching of music. He received musical instruction for many years from Ustad Aslam Khan, Pandit Baban Haldankar, and Pandit Satyashil Deshpande. He is the founder of Harbour Line, a publishing collective, and of Chitiz, an interactive forum for musicians. He is the recipient of grants from the Ministry of Human Resource Development and the Charles Wallace India Trust. Rahul Soni is a writer, editor, and translator based in India. He is senior commissioning editor, literary with HarperCollins India, associate editor with the journal Almost Island, and program coordinator at the Sangam House International Writers Residency. He has been previously associated with journals and the literary agency Writer's Side. He has edited the anthology of Hindi poetry in English translation, Home from a Distance, and translated Shrikant Verma's book of poems, Magad, Gitanjali, Shree's novel, The Roof Beneath Their Feet, and a selection of Ashok Bajpayee's poetry, A Name for Every Leaf. The moderator for this session, Jerry Pinto, is a Mumbai-based Indian writer of poetry, prose, and children's fiction, as well as a journalist. Pinto writes in English, and his works include Helen, The Life and the Times of the H-Bomb in the year 2006, which won the Best Book on Cinema Award at the 54th National Film Awards, Surviving Women in the year 2000, and Asylum and Other Poems in 2003. His first novel, M and the Big Whom, was published in 2012 and was awarded the Sahitya Academy Award in 2016. He has won the Wyndham Campbell Prize in 2016 for his fiction. He has been working on translations of Marathi women saint poets in collaboration with musician Neela Bhagavat. And we also have with us Mani Rao, who is a poet, translator, and scholar. She has 9 books of poetry, including new and selected poems, Poetry Wala, 2 books in translation, Bhagavad Gita as a poem, and Kalidas for the 21st Century Reader. Her latest book, Living Mantra, Mantra, Deity, and Visionary, Experience Today, is an anthropology of mantra experience among Hindu tantric practitioners in Andhra, Telangana. She has an MFA in creative writing from UNLV and a PhD in religious studies from Duke University. She has held residencies at Omi Ledig House 2018, Loa IWP 2005 and 2009, and was the 2006 University of Loa International Programs Writer in Residence. May I request moderator Jerry Pinto to begin this panel discussion on the word made flesh, the vexed business of translation.
It would be nice to have these mics on.
Check, check.
This one's on.
Over lunch, Danish and I were talking about the morning's events, and we agreed that both of us had this great envy of anyone who could sing, because effortlessly and immediately, and without even any need to tell you what they are singing, you sense the passion and the power of the song. And that perhaps may be, central to the way bhakti often wasn't just poetry. I mean, poetry, we have pinned to a certain way of talking, to a certain way of presentation on the page. Bhakti was the immediate transmission, I feel, of one person to another, grabbing them and saying, this is what I think, this is what I felt, you must know this too, you must feel this, can't you feel it now? See how, and the best way to do that is the universal language of music. Now, when you have a bhakti tradition which is alive and well around you, Kabir Panthis, people singing Meera, people quoting Meera, people, talking about this all the time. Indira told us that the songs are still alive in temples, even if they are not alive in middle-class homes. Why do we feel the need to take these things across the river to another language? Why do we need to remake them in another way? I think that's the central beginning question that I'd like to address, all of you to address. Understand this, I am in no way doubting the validity or the importance of the translation project in itself. There is nothing so important in the world of letters. If you don't believe me, just think about all the things that have enriched your reading from the various linguistic traditions that they have come. You have, at a fundamental level, Christ speaking Aramaic, being translated into Demotic Greek, being taken from there to Latin, through a miracle, translated 70 times over by 70 translators, each of them producing the same text. And then when Tyndall gets his head cut off for daring to translate the Bible into English, the Protestant movement bursts forth, and suddenly there is a Bible in every language. Fundamentally, the spread even of that faith, of any faith, of Buddhism, which we quoted this morning, came out of Pali, went into other languages. All these movements have based themselves on translation. So I'm not questioning that project at all, in no way. What I'm saying is, when you're confronted with this magnificent edifice of music and faith and living tradition, and everyone owning it, everyone saying it, singing it, thinking it, feeling it somewhere deep inside them, how do you dare to begin the process of translation? Mani, would you like to start? Because you've dealt with like the big boy in the room, the Bhagavad Gita.
You make it sound so scary. I sort of feel it's cheeky to say anything now.
No, cheeky is part of it.
For me, it's about knowing something. Translating is how I engage with a source text. It's how I experience it. And through translation, I internalize it and make it a part of myself. So also, together with that comes this sort of restraint or constraint that I am not actually available to translate anything and everything. I will only translate what I want to make a part of my life and what I want to engage with. So it is a decision that comes from having an experience of a source text and then talking to it and letting it talk to me and fighting it and learning from it. So I don't know, did that, yeah.
It's a lovely starting point. It's a wonderful way to take us forward as well, Mani. Thank you for that. Because what experience of this kind of art form would be greater than to have actually experienced it in music, as one of our panelists had. On the flight here, Anand and I were in the airport together, and he did a small impromptu little performance in my ear, literally. So it felt very Upanishadic, like, come and sit next to me and we'll talk about Acheda, Abheda. And as I was listening to him recite, I was thinking, this is almost irresistibly seductive. It is completely compelling. The sound of it, the rhythm of it, the way that the language fell, the words fell like in such perfect synchrony with the sense. What happens then, Anand, when you're starting the process of translating? What happens to that music in your head?
This is very interesting because, okay, let's stick with the translation of Bhakti verse just now specifically. And this is a form of poetry which I received as a child entirely through music. Music teachers, live concerts, Kumarji particularly, who was singing a lot of Kabir and Surdas and Tulsidas, D.V. Paluskar's records. Which means we started humming these tunes and getting the general gist of what was being said long before we started actually thinking about what each word meant and how it came together. It was also very different from listening to the average film song, you know. Because it was in medieval Hindi, it was in Braj Bhasha, and one needed a little initiation over there. But the more khayals one learned, the more one practically got, you know, one got a feel of the language. And particularly living in Bombay, यानी बम्बई की हिंदी आप लोगों को मालूम है, न यहाँ की न वहाँ की. पर ऐसे गुरु लोग थे मेरे उस्तादों की सोहबत में, थोड़ी फारसी मिल गई, थोड़ा ब्रज, थोड़ा ये, और मैं अपनी बंदिशें करने लगा पहले. I started composing my own compositions in Braj, which had to be grammatically corrected here and there. And it's when I actually, later on, when Arvind was translating Kabir, and I had major arguments with Arvind Mehrotra about his Kabir translation. I said, Arvind, this is just your own thing, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the original is this, you know. When, for instance, there are times when, in Kabir, when Kabir uses the word Mai, and that doesn't mean the doha is addressed to the mother. It just means, like you say, Are Bapre, it's an exclamation. And, but Arvind interpreted it that way, and, you know, we had these discussions, and around that time I began looking at Kabir, Surdas, Mira as literary forms, which is to say, reading them. And the first thing that struck me was that the minute you compose a bhajan musically, you attack the rhythmic and phonetic integrity of the basic text. There is no way to do this without that. Even Thumaka Chalata Rama Chandra Bhajat Pe Janiya, Kilaki Kilaki Uthat Dhai, Girat Bhumi Latapatay, Dhai Matu Godlet, Dasharath Ki Raniya becomes Thumak Chalat Rama Chandra Bhajat Pe Janiya. 2 syllables are swallowed. That's just one instance. Then, of course, God will become Godalet. Now, if our first, अभी छोटी चीज़ है यार, एक उदाहरण, पर थोड़ा सुर चाहिए फिर. I've come prepared, Arundhati, with my iPad. See, 1 second. Huh? No, Baba. Sorry about this. Electronics is so complicated. Can we just shut this, please? Thank you. All right, Tanpura. Sama ठुमक चलत रामचंद्र बाजत पैजनिया ठुमक चलत रामचंद्र ठुमक चलत रामचंद्र ठुमक चलत. What happens is Tulsidas ji captures the sense of the baby Ram trying to walk. So Ram is human. He doesn't come into this world knowing how to walk. And it's the rhythm that gives this. But what is superimposed upon the basic rhythm, Thumak chalat Ram Chandra Bajat Pejaniya, is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which is alien to the basic chand. जो छंद है कविता का उस पे संगीतकार ने और एक छंद डाला है. And I have a small issue about this idea that you introduced in the beginning about the universal language of music. So I'd like to talk about that in context a little later, but we go there.
So I think at this point maybe good to move to. You can keep it as a background score, I think.
Can I just finish this point, Jerry? Because it came to me through music, I didn't see these things. It's only when I perceived it as a literary form that I began to become conscious enough to start translating it. Although I had the urge to do that at times, but no, that's important.
Rahul, as someone who's worked on many sides of this translation equation, as publisher, as translator yourself, where do you stand on this experience thing, this notion of the basic fundamental chand, for instance, not to be violated? This idea that Arvind is, when he does Kabir, and if is doing something that is not Kabir and is Arvind and naming it Kabir. What's your take on that?
In that specific instance, though, I think...
Not specific instance. Just I wanted you to talk about liberty. Liberty and restraint in the processes of translation, in your process of translation. But please first, Rahul, what made you want to come into translation? And then we'd go on.
Okay, it's what made me come into translation is pretty much what Mani was saying. It's the desire to engage with a certain text. I mean, I've also translated because I've been asked to, which was the case in my foray into translating Meera. But something like Shrikant Varma's Magad, for example, I write in English, and I found him doing something in Magad that I wanted to try and replicate, or try and figure out how he did that and how I could bring that into my own way of writing, perhaps as maybe a tool in your toolbox or something of that sort. So yeah, that was the fundamental urge there. I mean, With Meera, on the other hand, it was Arundhati asked me if I would like to attempt that, and I came at it with some misgiving and reluctance, but I did find things there which I wasn't expecting, because we all think we know, as you're saying, it's all out there in some form or the other, and we all think we somehow know what it's about, and then when you get to the text, you find out that you don't know, and there's so many versions of it. Most of the versions, of course, a lot of things happen. I mean, it's a very complicated sort of thing going on there. It's simple to say that a lot of versions are maybe somehow flattened out, sentimentalized, made more mainstream or whatever. There are versions of text that I've seen which have verses that are not included in any sung versions that I know. There were surprises in store in that sense.
It's a lovely thing, the word surprise, that the unexpected that comes up, because that's what often happens when you're translating, no? And engaging with the text, because reading it is one thing. You're reading it, and often this is the act of a conquistador. And we all are at times people who want to add that to our store. We've finished reading it. Oh, sorry, me?
Yeah, please, Jerry.
My translation project started in a gym, actually. I share a gym with Neela Bhagwat in Mahim. I'm sorry, my stories tend to be like this. But that day, the music system wasn't working, and Neela was actually on the treadmill next to mine and started singing Muktabai. And the lovely thing about Indian classical music is that words don't evaporate quickly. They keep coming back. Words don't evaporate quickly. They keep coming back. So when words don't evaporate quickly and they keep coming back, you can think about those words much more. At this point, you're supposed to break into applause, because I just did a little English shairi. Yeah? So you actually get the feeling. So she was doing Mungi Udali Akashi. So this is a wonderful Muktabai poem in which she says, an ant flew into the sky, she swallowed the sun. And I kept thinking of this little girl sitting in the dust, picking up an ant and closing one eye and being able to completely block out the sun. And then I thought of a full-fledged woman experiencing God and this meltdown of gold and lava inside her, which is what God must feel like when, he comes and bumps into you suddenly. And that was swallowing the sun for me. And I thought, I want to read this poetry more. And I'm a lazy bounder. I'd like to read in the language I'm comfortable in, which is English. So I asked Neela, I said, do you think, I should say Neela G and all, but it just she's my buddy, so she's Neela. That's the English problem, okay? So, but Neela G then. I should say, I said to Neela G, I want to read these things. And she said, they haven't been translated. So I said, let's do it together. And she said, yeah, let's. And I've said this to hundreds of people over hundreds of different things. Let's do this, let's do that. And no one ever pays any attention, because they think he's just like this, excitable person and nothing will come of it. Or they get on with their lives or whatever. But about a month later, Neela turned up at my doorstep with her G and with a selection of the poems, and we started working. And what a wonderful, weird challenge that was, because she would sing the thing to me, and then I'd get a sense of the tone and the tune of it. This is 13th century Marathi. My Marathi is okay, but it's not like 13th century Marathi requires another level of effort. And so there I was wading through this stuff, completely aware of my complete and total inadequacy, because nothing in that stuff, nothing in the poetry came naturally or effortlessly to me. But the only thing that kept me going was, this is what the poets are saying again and again. I'm helpless, I'm floundering, I'm drowning, save me, pull me through, get me to the other side. When you finally see The Ant Who Swallowed the Sun, translated by Neela Bhagwat and Jerry Pinto, understand that one half of that bunch of translators came to the shore half drowned. So the question I was asking Mani before, she very kindly and in womanly fashion sort of suggested that I should talk to, women are naturally more inclusive, I think, was this experience of surprise. Because you were doing a text that, as someone who'd studied religion as well, you must have been familiar with it in a way. But what were the surprises that the Gita sprang on you, or the later texts that you translated?
Actually, it's the other way around. I hadn't studied religion. No, that's fine. It's the other way around, actually. Because when I started translating the Gita, that was 2007. I did my PhD in 2000, started in 2010, and it was actually for engaging with mantra, which was a totally different project. Gita actually happened because when I was reading it, the delight that I felt, the drama that I experienced, I didn't find it in the English translations. And as I was engaging with it, it just became deeper. Partly the vexation was due to the dissatisfaction with previous translations, because it's all linked. I discovered that the reason I had not read it fully before in English was because the translations had been bland. And it's, even though when I was in school, now I know I'm getting a little convoluted here, when I was in school, like this is decades ago, I had studied a few shlokas from the Gita, a handful, and had memorized them like most students, like, I knew, and I thought I knew it. Soul is indestructible, and, avatar happens to sort of reinstate dharma. Like, I knew all the basic messages. I know it. It's gone into the background. What is the necessity to read it, right? So there was no, motivation. And I don't think that the English translations that I had in my shelves actually engaged me to go, to really read the whole thing. So actually, the first time I read it was sort of on the cusp of a translation theory class. I wanted to work with the Gita Govinda, and the professor, Giuseppe Natali, he's a translator of Moby Dick. He translates it to Italian, from Italian into English. He, and the other way around, he said, why don't you work with the Gita? It's because he didn't know Gita Govinda. And I thought, okay, fine. And I did a textual analysis of a few stanzas. And when I did that, that was when I discovered how inadequate those translations were, and then I just got sucked into it, and then it's sort of like the project became bigger and bigger. So what I found was that most translations were just repetitive. They just repeated the same thing, and they claimed to take it forward, but in fact they were just playing with either the line breaks, and it looked like a poem on the page because it had line breaks, but it didn't sound like a poem. And if it was prose, of course, you just completely missed the play. Whereas in the Gita, there was a lot of language play. There was, na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah. And the wordplay actually is very meaningful. It's not for the sake of it. And the language is very simple. It's very simple Sanskrit. It's not like classical Sanskrit poetry at all. Whereas the English was very complicated. So I actually have one, like the udaharan that you talked about. I have one example to share for that particular shloka, Nasato Vidyate Bhava. Here's the translation. Of the non-existent, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, there is no change. And there's another translation. Of the impermanent, one finds no being, and one finds no non-being in the permanent. So, of course, I'm sure that they are accurate, but in order to penetrate that, you have to really go through the commentary. So what inspired sort of the technique was to integrate the footnotes and the commentary into the translation, and I sort of slowly discovered what translation would solve, what kind of technique would solve the problem, so to speak. So instead of translating a single word with a single word and a line with a line, I sort of took away those constraints and worked with it sort of at a poetry level and with the mood of it. So for the first verse, for example, so the surprises for me were in the process. The surprises was, one, the experience. This is so delightful to read in Sanskrit. And what can I do with that? And how can I let that enter me? And then as I read it, of course, then the rest of it is the teaching itself, which I learned a lot from it. So the very first verse, I know I'm talking too long now, right?
No, please, the verse. We want to hear the verse in Sanskrit.
Okay, the first one.
Shlok.
Okay, so the first verse, for example, which is Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yuyutsavaha Mamakaha Pandavascha Kima Kurvata Sanjaya. And the way it is normally sung is in a sing-song manner, in a melodic manner, of course, but it's usually Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yuyutsavaha. And then there's usually a ping.
Okay, not
Mamakaha Pandavaschaiva Kima Kurvata Sanjaya Ping. Okay? So you get so used to this, and what you forget is that what's actually happening in that shloka is a lot of drama. All that has gone on until there, all that has happened until there in the Mahabharata, it's all come to a head. And it's actually not in that tone. The tone is actually, this is Sanjaya and Dhritarashtra are talking, and one is asking the other. Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yuyutsavaha Mamakaha Pandavaschaiva Kima Kurvata Sanjaya. That's what's really going on in that verse.
Yes, clap properly.
Can I just share something on this in response to that? Because, okay, I'm an addict of Annie Besant's translation because that was the one that was around when I was 14, and but I could just about read some of the shloks in the original and break up the compounds, and I had this strong feeling that there was something wrong with our culture if all Brahmins reduce recitation of Gita to pure mathematics and chant, and a negation of emotion in the process. Because when Arjun says, Karpanya dosho pahat svabhava prichhami tvam dharma samudham chetaha yache yahasyan nishchitam bruhitan me shishyate steham shadimam tvam prapannam. Oh, Krishna answers, and there's so much drama. And I'm a drama lover. I'm a Shakespeare guy, I'm not a... basically, and I wonder why this is then turned into, something like Karpanya dosho pahata svabhavaha prichhami tvam dharma samudham chetaha. Is the Brahmanical attempt to negate emotion so nothing but mathematics and thought prevails? When Arjun says something like Kutastva kashmalam idam, Krishna says, Kutastva kashmalam idam vishame samupasthitam anarya ajoshtam asvargyam akirtikaram Arjuna. That's, and Annie Besant does something nice, you feel like singing it. She goes like, whence this dejection, Arjuna? Why have you put down your bow? You feel like... I mean, I'm not an opera singer, but if it were an opera, this is a moment,
Okay, now we're going to hear, we heard Annie Besant being channeled through Anand Thakore. Now we're going to hear what Mani Rao did with the same lines.
This was fun.
Let me find the... I've got to find the same lines. 2 point something. I'll do the first verse since we talked about that process, huh? So that is actually, it's very simple in the English. Dhritarashtra to Sanjaya. And when it came to that, might, right, face off, what happened? Who did what?
So Rahul, surprises?
I thought I'd leave that surprise for the reading tomorrow, but I don't know, that particular surprise.
If you have a surprise for tomorrow,
I
then
don't
keep
know.
it for
I mean,
tomorrow
it was
because
for
these
me. I
bounders
don't know
have
if
to
it's
come
for
back.
anyone else, but
Yeah?
yeah, it was for me. I don't know if it's for anyone else, but we'll find out, I think. But just to come back to process, I think, and that was the part of the question I left unanswered before. Like my attempt, usually, I don't come at it from a music angle, usually. My attempt usually is to just stick to the text. There is a, I don't know, there's a phrase, and I cannot place who I'm quoting there. I like that very much, though. It's literal force, the literal force of the text, and that's what I try to work with. Just the words on the page and what they're saying, not the commentary, not bringing all the baggage into it. These are the words that were conveying something in an original language, and what can I do with them here in the translation, I think.
I've read your translation of Magadha. I read the original, and then I read the translation out of curiosity, because it's actually very direct Hindi for me to receive in the original. But I found it extremely readable as English poetry of a particular kind, of a very simple, direct kind, and very minimalistic. How hard was it to achieve that balance, and what did it involve? What do you feel you missed out? Got left in the Hindi that you couldn't bring into English?
Okay. Yeah, so how hard was it? Surprisingly hard. I mean, I've had people who have read the Hindi tell me it's like, oh yeah, it's easy stuff. It's very easy to translate. And I found that not the case. I think I worked on the collection as a whole for more than 5 years, maybe. And I started out by just like, I didn't think of it as translation at that point. I was just trying to do those verses in English somehow. And so I in my first draft, I took a ton of liberties. I was kind of making them my poems, playing with the line breaks, and giving them some sort of structure that could work in my head. And then I worked back from that towards the original, which I find, funnily enough, when I approach something as a translation, I tend to work the other way around, and I'm not sure to the same effect.
That's really interesting.
The other
I
way
just
around
wanted,
means what exactly?
Anand, just
What
a
is-
moment.
Sorry.
Anand?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to take this to Mani at this point in time because I wanted, he used a lovely phrase, the literal force of the text. I wanted to, at this point in time, we are more than aware that texts exist in time as well, and translations happen in time. So there are extra literal forces that the text sometimes can be either subjected to in order to prove certain points, or there are certain ways in which that text is to be received. So there are extra literal forces surrounding the text and trying to guard it. Was this any concern of yours when you were working? Yeah, or for mantra, whichever ones you've done so far. Gita is a good way to start it.
No, because I have not, like the Ishavasya Upanishad or whatever, it was not a commissioned work at all. So there was no question of being in discussion with anybody or taking a brief from anybody. I was doing it for myself. Later on, if it was published, it was a different matter. So I was not under any constraints. I must say that for the Gita, I did have my own mental barriers at moments. Like in that part where when Arjuna talks about how how can I do this? And if I kill my relatives, then all of these terrible things will happen to the clan, and there'll be intermixing, and our women will be violated. All those things are being, and I was like, I just want to skip these stanzas, maybe. I mean, that the thought actually just came to the mind, and then I had to dialogue with myself that that's not my job. This is the source text. It's not Mani Rao, it's the Gita. It's through me, so it will have my timbre or voice or lens, but I can't tamper with it. So in that sense, fidelity is important to the extent that, look, every translator will claim that theirs has got more fidelity, and that's kind of part of like the deal or the dhanda or whatever you want to call it. It's going to happen that everyone, and that's probably also part of the process of translation, that you have to refresh it into whatever world we're in. And because everything that I have done is retranslation, that issue comes up, and that there's a refreshing, like with Kalidasa. The problem I faced there was that there is an expectation that because it's Kalidasa, it has to sound classical. It has to sound sort of quaint actually, because it has to sound like some Victorian verse. But the point is, Kalidasa never thought of himself like that. In Malavikagnimitram, in the preface, when the Sutradhar talks to the assistant director, there's this question. They say, why are you doing this Vartamana Kavi Kalidasa? Why aren't you doing Bhasa and Saumilla? Kaviputra, why aren't you doing those? So you can see that Kalidasa actually thought of himself as a contemporary, as a current poet. Yeah, avant-garde, exactly. So then the question is, if you do something sonorous, actually that is representative of any Sanskrit poetry. Why would that then be Kalidasa? So then you have to go deeper and try to identify what's Kalidasa. And in that, then my own poetics will come into play, as to which probably also is why I would be attracted to Kalidasa in the first place, which is the juxtapositions, the accuracies, all of those things. So that gets highlighted. So in answer to your question, I think, yes, absolutely, the various other forces are at play, and it's in grappling with it that the challenge and the fun of translation, I guess, happens. Yeah.
Anand, in the Surdas experiment, in your moment with Surdas, although I suppose there must be many moments and this was one of them, I think you translated again for Eating God, right?
Yes.
Arundhati is
Arundhati,
locked
do you have a
to
copy
answer
of
for.
Eating God? In
Yeah.
case you
Yeah.
want to hear a little bit of the translation, but I think we don't need to read it might just help to have the book. Thanks. Thank you, Jerry. It's strange, this is one of the few poems that didn't come to me from music. This is something I came across when Satyashilji was reading Harivansh Rai Bachchan's autobiography in 4 parts. And these are his favorite lines in Surdas. And the basic thing about a Surdas bhajan is it's a cyclic structure. It's not a linear structure. It turns around a basic line. Sorry. So, what I felt was, and this is true of Kabir also, that is true of the bhajan form basically, but Linda Hess and many other translators put this aside and they get on with the content, verse to verse to verse to verse. Now, I felt somewhere that some degree of repetition of the basic line was necessary, but it cannot be the way it happens in the original because that's mechanical. 2 lines in English, then the basic line. 2 lines in English, it'll never work, like a villanelle or something. It'll get monotonous, unless monotony is what is intended. So that was a problem I had to work around. Then there were interesting things, like I'm just looking at the basic line. Beautiful rhythm it has. And I used a 4-beat structure in English. So there's some metricality in what I do in English. But the original has a 7-beat structure. It goes like, Murali Adhar Saji Balbir, नाद सुनी वनिता विमोही घर बिसारें चीर मुरली अधर सजी बलबीर धेनु तृण त्यजि ठाड़े ठाड़े बच्छ तजि मुख छीर मुरली अधर सजी बलबीर etc. Now नैन मूंद समाधि धर खग बैठ जो मुनि धीर मुरली अधर सजी बलबीर डोल नहीं तृण लता बिथ के मंद गंध समीर मुरली अधर सजी बलबीर सूर मुरली सबद सुनि थकी रहत जमुना नीर मुरली अधर सजी बलबीर. So repetition is, it's what you said, the poem, whatever else it says, it keeps saying the same thing. It has one essential thing that it has to keep saying. Now, Murali Adhar Saji Balbir. Krishna is referred to in this very masculine fashion as Balbir. वो वीर है और मुरली स्त्रीलिंग है, मुरली नाजुक है. There's no way I can get this in English. Because nouns do not carry gender in the same way in English, essentially. Who likes nouns? Okay, they were clapping for gender or nouns? Like, okay. No, but, so that was an essential problem there. I had to work around it, and it became something else. It changed a little bit. Where is my translation? I don't know where it is. No. Any idea where it is? I don't know where mine are, but I'll find it. Yeah, but this was one of the problems, was gender. And how many times to repeat this basic thought without getting monotonous? So, let me just find it. I'll have to go through the index. God. I should have done all this. Would somebody like to carry on the discussion while I search for it? And
This is the last thing that we almost.
okay, in that case, please bear with me a second more. Somehow remember it was on the left, not the right. Yeah, but I usually. God. My God. I found another one of my translations, but not that one. Surdas. I really should have come more prepared, but kidhar hai?
I think
Do you remember what the title
I
was?
think one of the most exciting things about bhakti is the
Talk for
sense
2
of
minutes.
incompletion. No. I think what you will do
Talk for
instead,
2
Anand,
minutes.
is let them read the translation when they buy the book outside, and instead just finish with the rest of the Murli.
No, I finished that poem,
So do it again.
but it was
Do it again, yeah. Anand, do it again, and then
Sing.
you can't do this. You can't stop.
no, we find it no somewhere. अभी शुरू किया है तो ये then okay, I'll read another. Then I'll wait. I'll just read a small doha translated by Tulsidas, and I'll read the original. I was particularly fond of this doha क्योंकि जैसे अपने जीवन का एक रामायण होता है ना, तो अभी अरुंधति asked me to translate something from Tulsidas, and I said what? Like, and I opened the Adi Kand, and Tulsidas mentions bhang. So I was like there's something interesting in the Ramayana, and it's beautiful. He says, Ram naam kalpataru kali kalyan nivasu jo sumirat bhayo bhang te tulsi tulsidasu. तो मैं भांग की पत्ती जैसे था, मैं तुलसी की पत्ती जैसे बन गया राम नाम का सुमिरन करके. Now, there's no way I could get all that into 2 lines. So a formal attempt at translation was not even, I didn't even consider it. But somehow, sometimes when I explain these things to people, I automatically come up with a translation. And a little adjustment, and it might just work. I'll read it. The name. A doha never has a title, for instance. It's converted into a poem in English. The name. The name of Ram is a universal tree that shelters us in these fallen times. And merely recalling it has taught me to be true to my own. For I, Tulsidas, who was scrawny and dry as a leaf of cannabis, have now turned as green and life-giving as a leaf of the tulsi plant. The name of Ram has brought me to delight in my own.
Thank you all so much. Thank you very much, all three of you. And please stay around for the next session, which is Oriya poets talking about Oriya poetry. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. We should have turned the focus on you, yeah.